Hey, how about that? Andy Molnar in the Theater of the Mind, back with project management and you guys for part 3 of week 5. This is it. Some important points, though, in these final slides. There are ways to estimate. You'll use which best for you. A high-level estimate is called analogous estimating. And the root word there is by, you see, analog or analogy. So by analogy, I would look for some historical records of a similar project of equal scope to mine, similar, and I would maybe make some updates, but it's by analogy. It's analogous using historical documents. I would also do bottom-up estimating. So from every activity, I would add it up and just keep going through the work breakdown structure until I got to the top. And that would be bottom-up estimating, adding the costs up and accounting for everything. Another type of estimating is called parametric, and the key is parameter, which is the root to parametric. Parameters. So a type of parametric estimating would be if you're buying a house and they quote you, it's $100 per square foot. Well, it's not really $100 per square foot. It will depend on some of the things you add to it. But the builder's saying, in general, for this frame, my estimate is $100 per square foot. So there's a parameter, some mathematical model that it's using, in this case, per square foot. Okay? All right, so the cost estimating process. We have our detailed steps, and we're going to summarize the information and consult with experts along the way. My budget folks are going to be extraordinarily helpful here. So here's a simple cost estimate. Now they're starting with the work breakdown structure, because remember, if it's not in the work breakdown structure, it's not in your project. And notice they break up the cost estimates based on the process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. They're accounting for internal labor. They're accounting for external labor. Along the way, they're accounting for non-labor, perhaps rent or things loaned. And they're making assumptions, right, and writing them down along the way. This is a good example of how to budget. So in the end, once I get my budget, that gives me my cost baseline. All right. The cost baseline goes into the project management plan. Remember, the project management plan is an umbrella plan with subsidiary plans, sub-plans we talked about, and the 3 baselines, right? The 3 baselines are scope, schedule, and cost. That's it. This is the last of those 3 baselines. Okay. Now here are some project budget components to think about. So I've got my project budget. This is what I'm going to manage. That's the total budget. That's the total budget of everything. You see there's nothing higher. Now let me start on the right instead. So I will determine activity cost estimates. Whenever I say activity, you know that's the schedule I'm talking about, right? The schedule. Okay, so I'll have my cost estimates and reserves. What if something goes wrong? There's a risk I've identified. I'm going to call that a reserve. So I'll set that money aside too and identify it. And all of these cost estimates roll up into the work packages, and these activity reserves roll up into an overall contingency reserve. That's still something I get to manage. In the work breakdown structure, I've added control accounts so that I can manage the money as we add it up based on what box it's applied to. Okay, this is going to be my cost baseline right here. All of this. This is my cost baseline. My boss will set aside some management reserves, and I won't have access to that. That's because I used to set aside 8% of my budget. I would then give 92% to the project manager. They wouldn't be aware that I had kept 8% back. That was my rule of thumb. It's not a law as a management reserve when things go bad. I once had a project to roll out a new IT cybersecurity logging system. And in that logging system, they promised me that they promised my project manager, the only disks needed were the standard disks. And once we implemented the logging system, it didn't work. Even though experts outside of my company, advisors, had told me those disks will be fine, they weren't. I had to then convert to SD drives, which are high powered, very low tooled, not a lot of moving part discs. They're very expensive discs. And it's a good thing I had my management reserve set aside, because my project manager had not accommodated for that contingency in their contingency reserves right there. So anyhow, the overall project budget will include the management reserves plus the cost baseline. And remember, the baseline is everything over here, okay? So anyhow, that's how that works. So keep in mind that this project budget, let's go right here, project budget is everything right here. The management reserves plus the cost baseline. All right, good slide. I like that. So like any project, here's how it's going to flow for you. We have our cost baseline, and at the start of the project, I'm not spending very much. You can see that there's very little spend down here. Okay, as the project accelerates, my funding requirements are going to accelerate, and I'm going to spend lots of money, and at the end it'll tail off. Where I want to end up is budget at completion. That's what BAC is. Budget at completion at the start of my project is equal to my planned budget. Okay, my planned budget is budget at completion when I start my project. It's just that I will fall behind, as they show right here, right? See, I'm falling behind, or my funding requirements are changing. So that may actually change my budget at completion at the end. But when I start my project, my budget at completion equals my planned budget. I want to end there. Things happen, right? This is what's the definition of a project. It's temporary and unique, not been done before. So these are some things we watch out for and try and control. What went wrong? This is an excellent slide. Take your time to review it. I think you'll get a lot out of it. And write me if you have any questions. So here's a sample cost baseline. Again, starting with the WBS and then using the 5 process groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Everyone is budgeted for. Notice it also includes reserve money, right? Reserve, my contingency reserve. If I've identified risks and I know how much it's going to cost if that risk happens, that's a contingency reserve, okay? And that pretty much forms my total budget. You notice this does not include management reserves at all. This number that I just circled ends up being my cost baseline. This is my cost baseline. And when I say mine, I mean it's the project manager's cost baseline. Okay. Don't forget, management reserves will be on top of that, which will give me then a different project budget overall, which will include management reserves. Okay. All righty then. So in Agile, there isn't a lot of schedule planning going on. What we do is we use a time box in Agile instead. And a time box is the time of the sprint, right? Remember, I had said sprints can really be from 1 to 4 weeks, but I keep it to 2 weeks, because if you get longer than 2 weeks, my experience has been that your sprint begins to stall, right? We lose focus of what we're working on. So that my time box is 2 weeks. That's really all there is to scheduling in Agile. And what you'll do is you'll pull forward user stories that you can build out in software within those 2 weeks. Okay. What about dependencies, right? Ideally, one Scrum team can perform all the work in that product backlog, which has all my user stories that I'm pulling forward. But there are sometimes dependencies within that backlog, and the team will identify those, and you will pull them forward as you need. Now, if you have, say you're not just one Agile project and one Scrum team, what if you're multiple Agile projects and multiple Scrum teams working on the same project? Then periodically you would hold a Scrum of Scrums, right? And you would go and you talk about where you're at so that you all stay in sync and you're building things that will enhance the overall, let's see if I can get my pen to work. Sometimes it does, the overall release. I'm going to change the color. There we go. That'll change the overall release, right? You want to release together. It does no good if this team is way advanced and this team's way behind. Your release isn't going to work. So a Scrum of Scrums keeps you on track. Now, what I love about a Kanban board is I use 4 columns in a Kanban board, and it's a pull system. It's a pull system. When I have capacity, I'm going to pull the next work forward. And what I have is I have 4 columns: work not started, work in progress. I have work that is escalated or has hit a wall, needs my attention or others, and then I have work done, right? And that's how I put my work here, and I pull stuff forward as I have capacity to work it. That's Kanban board. And what we're doing is we're trying to measure the work in process is really how it is, but they called it progress here. The work in progress, or WIP. They call it a WIP rate. And once you establish a WIP rate, you'll know after a while what your team can do. Once you've established the WIP rate, you're all set. And that will help you control the pace of your schedule. That's really how Agile does it. Yep, here's that sample Kanban board now. You could see this is requested, or I said waiting to start, pulled in process, and done. I add work that is stalled or needs escalation as well. Because I want to separate escalation from in progress that is working naturally and doesn't need my help. Okay. We do also do estimates, but they're relative estimates, right? We might use t-shirt sizes as a good example. T-shirt. What do t-shirts come in? Extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, right? And the team will get together and we'll all vote on if this activity is a small activity, a large. We'll just use t-shirt sizes instead of coming up with actual numbers like we did with PERT in a schedule. We're not coming up with actual times. We're coming up with a general estimate of how long. So they're relative estimates along the way. Oh, here we go. T-shirt sizing. There's an example. Another way to do it is called planning poker. There's some good YouTubes on that if you're interested in that as well. There's some good video highlights along the way. And there you go. That's really it for planning. That was fun. I hope you enjoyed it too. I will see you online. This is Midway, week 5. Let's have fun.